Turning now to finances and the fiscal health of cities in Michigan. We've long talked about how revenue sharing to cities has been drastically cut. They have to provide services, in many cases with decreased property taxes and large long-term obligations. Our state population hasn't really grown, and we have a lot of things that need investment. Well, this week, Business Leaders for Michigan, which is also an underwriter of MiWeek, had a fiscal summit in Lansing, and the group listed off recommendations, including restructuring teacher pensions and retiree health care. And it was an entire day-long kind of look at the situation that we're facing here in Michigan, which, you know, isn't always the splashiest headlines, but something that is a deep-seated problem. And the biggest fear, what people were talking about, is the fact that cities may not be prepared for the next recession, which will be coming, my friends, somewhere along
Soon,
the line.
probably.
Well, hopefully not, but yeah, it would seem inevitable. We've had a long period of growth, slow growth, albeit, but still, we're due probably for a correction and a downturn. Pension reform is essential. I mean, we're in a state that overpromised, now can't pay those obligations. I think the key is what you said in your opening there is we have had no population growth, or very little population growth in this state. We're a stagnant state. We need an influx of people, whether it's immigrants, whether it's, I don't really care where the people come from now. We can't continue to be a stagnant growth state and expect to pay for all of the needs this state has. Another thing that hasn't grown in this state is household incomes very much. So, you know, it's very easy to say, well, we'll go and raise taxes for this and raise taxes for that and raise taxes over here, but people's incomes haven't gone up. They can't sustain these tax assaults, and so the only answer is growth. And unless we come up with a formula for growth, I think we're in for some very hard times here.
Stephen, what do you think are the biggest issues facing our municipalities, our cities right now?
Well, I mean, the biggest issue is not actually pensions, it's the loss of revenue sharing. I mean, I can't remember the exact number, but you're talking about more than $1 billion have been pulled out of local governments over the last 15, 20 years, and that makes it harder to provide the services that you need to provide in these communities. You've got to rethink the way that we fund
so where is that money
government.
gone that was pulled out? Where did it go?
Well, some of it went into the tax cut for businesses, which almost a direct transference of money from things like schools and municipal government.
A small amount went there, but it created jobs and development.
But as you point out, it created jobs. It hasn't raised incomes. So we're hurting. And the truth is that if you want a state that works, if you want a city that can deliver services, you have to pay for it. And we have to be more focused on how to pay for it. I agree that we can't afford anymore to promise people things that we're not going to be able to afford in the future, and that we're not investing in the future. But you're also not going to get people to work for municipal government at the salaries that they have without some sort of incentive for retirement.
Okay, so, you know, where are we when it comes to political will for some kind of changes? I moderated a panel discussion in Lansing that included State Senate Majority Leader Arlen Meekhoff and State Rep Sam Singh. Here's what they had to say about pension reform. So let's dive into the possibility of some action. And I'm going to start off with in lame duck session. Hearings were held to address the unfunded local government OPEB liabilities. We've talked about that, but at the end of the day, it was tabled. I'm going to start with you, Senator Meekhoff. Is there a possibility of another attempt to address that in this session?
Yes, there's not only an attempt, but I think there's going to be a well-versed attempt at trying to tackle this issue. What somebody hasn't mentioned, maybe they mentioned it before. When you're in trouble and you're digging a deeper hole, stop digging. We got to stop digging. And that means we got to have to make some structural or other changes to that. So Michigan is not in the pension business. We're not very good at it. So let's find a different way for people to have a secure retirement. And I think that's the tool there is the 401k. I'm hoping that we could get to some point where we could say we have a pension system for those that are in it. And for those that want to go to 401k, we find a way for them to get to 401k and just have the two systems.
Representative Singh, do you agree that we're going about this in the right way? And what would you add or subtract to what Senator Meekhoff just said?
Well, I would say that, you know, I appreciated the governor's task force. I think you're serving on it, and we appreciate your service on it. That is taking a look at how we deal with this issue. And so I think that's a starting point. They brought everybody to the table, Democrats, Republicans, management, labor organizations, local communities, and I think they're having good discussions. And I think in the next couple of weeks we'll see something more formal from them. But I think one of the things that they haven't been talking about is the issues dealing with local governments and how you deal with revenue. And having been a former mayor and having to deal with a number of those issues, we know that the state, whether it was under the previous administration or this administration, has balanced the state budget on the backs of the local governments as well as the school districts. We have a statutory formula for revenue sharing. We've never met during the 5 years I've been in office here at this point in time. The governor's never met that statutory number. And because of that, that's why we talk about the $7.5 billion that should have gone to local governments as part of the formula that's in regards to the sales tax. We've used that to balance other parts of the state budget. And we've taken that money away from them. And so you've double hit them when they have a bad economic time, because with property taxes and with the Headley Act, you can't raise your property tax as much as it fell in 2008 and 2009. And so that's a key driver for local governments. And so those are two really key items that we have to address that aren't being really talked about, I think. You know, we can talk about, and I want to talk about, how we bring down the costs of pensions and healthcare liabilities for communities, but you have to at the same time talk about the revenue, and the state has to stop using this local government money to balance its budget and actually put it back into the locals and help them meet those financial obligations.
So how do you do that? How do you make sure that you get that more money back to the, but you have to plug the hole somewhere?
Well, again, I think you take a look at how we're funding things right now. I would put more money and resources towards revenue sharing. That should be a priority first, and then take a look at the other parts of the budget and take a look at how you fund those things. But you know, what I've seen here in the 5 years that I've been here is that that's never been the conversation. You know, we always want to fund the things that are within our departments or the things that the state government wants to fund. I'm surprised at how many times that we pat ourselves on the back that we have a new class of state police officers. And I love the state police, and we added 100 new state troopers. But 5,000 local police and firefighters have been let go on the local level all across the state over the last 15 years. So we've lost 5,000 police and firefighters, but we pat ourselves on the back because that 100 we just added on. That's because the state government only deals with the 100 people in the state police. We don't deal with local government. So we make these cuts, we pass them on to the local governments, and we don't actually solve the problem. So I would say that's how you start it first. You fully fund that statutory, and then you fund the rest of government around that.
Senator Meekhoff, I'm going to let you respond to that. And do you believe that you've been having the right conversations? Because clearly Representative Singh does not believe so.
I was using the word statutory. The word is discretionary. Local governments have gotten all the constitutional revenue sharing that they are due. The other is discretionary. That's why you elect us, to have discretion. And we've decided that these are our priorities, and this is the way we put the budget together. Now, we're not taking any money away from you. It is money for us to decide how to split up. Who here would dare venture a guess, if we hadn't done that discretion, where the state's finances would be? We'd be broke. Okay? You would all have no money. We'd be in receivership. You elect us to make these decisions, and they are not easy decisions. I don't agree with Representative Singh on the way that he portrays this, but I will tell you, every single vote that I and my colleagues have cast has been with local governments in mind and all our priorities in mind, because it is at our discretion, and that's why you send us here, to have that discretion. And we continue to do that at the best of our ability.
These are difficult decisions that are happening right now in Lansing. Stephen, let me ask you, what political minefield now does the legislature have to start going through to have either some kind of pension reform conversation or talking about funding?
Well, the pension reform conversation, it always gets framed in the context of somehow that state workers are greedy or getting something they don't deserve, and that's a big problem because it's A, not true, and B, you need state workers to be people who want those jobs and competent people who want those jobs, and people don't want to work for, you know, poor wages and lousy benefits. So we've got to reframe that conversation around what is a reasonable way to approach retirement and benefits for people who spend their lives serving as government workers. It's a different story at the local level, where the problems are much worse, where the underfunding is much larger and more garish. But again, you can't punish state workers or municipal workers in order to balance the state budget. The revenue sharing question, though, I think is the bigger issue. And you heard Arlen Meekoff say there, this is our money and we get to decide how it divides up. But if you look at, that's money we send to Lansing. It's not their money, it's our money in these communities. We pay those taxes, and the state has long agreed that that money, they're essentially a pass-through for that money. They have cut it down to bare bones, and you see it all over the state in terms of cities who cannot provide the services they're supposed to do and stay within their budget.
Nolan, what do you see happening in Lansing now in terms of politically trying to jockey and figure out what to do?
Well, it's always been a very politically fraught thing to tackle because there are such powerful interests involved here, and particularly the teachers' unions, very hard to go up against. But we have to take a realistic approach here. Steve said, well, we've got to offer these pensions to get people to work. I think the states and local communities would be much better off paying people market wages for these jobs and putting them on the same sort of retirement systems that we've been on in the private sector for 2 decades.
But you need money to do that too.
And so, and then I think you also have to bring some realism to when people retire. We've got municipal workers working 20, 25 years, retiring in their early 50s, late 40s.
You don't see that much anymore.
We have that still, and then they're on the public payroll then for another 40 years, 30, 40 years. I think we've got to establish minimum retirement ages. I don't think anybody ought to be retiring and drawing their pensions if they're not yet 62, given today's actuarial realities. I think you can't have people retiring at 50, 52 just because they put their 20 or 25 years in.